The Last Flight, this book was fucked up. Okay, there's these two women. We'll just start out there. There's two women. They both don't have any family. The first one, she is in college and she's like really good like with chemistry. Like she's like really smart. And she's never had any boyfriend. She's always been kind of off and like didn't want anything to do with anybody, didn't trust anybody because she was in and out of like homes. She never got adopted. And anyways, the one guy that was interested in her, he literally talks her into making pills in their chemistry like lab at school, right? So then they get caught. He swears that he's gonna take he's gonna take the blame for it, and he doesn't. So she gets kicked out of college. She's like, what the fuck? Then this other guy comes and he's like, hey, I have a proposition for you. So he basically gets her into like the drug world kind of thing. And then the other woman, she's married to a politician who's a piece of shit and beats the shit out of her all the time. And she's like trying to figure out how to get away. She tried to get away one time before and he caught her and literally, you know, beat the shit out of her and threatened her. She finds out that his ex-wife, he her because she tried to leave him. Anyway, so she finally gets this plan. They both get this plan. They're leaving. They're now leaving. They fucking meet at an airport and they switch like identities. Well, the girl who was like the chemist, she was supposed to be going to Puerto Rico where the other one originally was supposed to be going. Well, guess what? The plane fucking crashes. So then the rich woman who's with the politician, she's like, what the fuck? So she goes to her house that's paid for in cash and she's like hiding out and trying to figure out like what the hell. Well, then she ends up getting caught on camera and her husband now knows that she's alive. So then she goes on this show and like exposes everything. Just, it's like a whole thing that's going on. And then like the crazy thing is the plot twist is like the chemist lady, she kind of planned it all because the other lady's assistant knew what was going on because the assistant, her mom, ended up becoming friends with the chemist person. So this one, I would give this one like 4.5 stars. It was a solid read. Dear Enemy is a book about two sisters. One of them is adopted. And in school, the adopted sister, when they were going to prom, she had kind of got bullied by this one kid. And when they went to prom, they had all called her like Tater Tot, I guess. And they had made like, at prom, they had made like a bunch of tater tots and put them there and she left and she was like scarred for that, right? So as she got older, she ended up doing her own business and she was like a chef and blah, blah, blah. And then her sister was with the guy that had bullied her. And then like they had all, you know, kind of went their separate ways, right? They had broken up or whatever. Well, then the ex-boyfriend ended up becoming like a famous actor and the sister had gotten back with him, but she didn't know about it. Like she was his assistant. Well, then he contacts her and he's like, your sister basically stole my mom's watch and this watch is like $300,000. So she makes a deal to pay that off with the ex-boyfriend to work for him and be his personal chef and his assistant and all this other shit. Well, they end up falling in love. They end up falling in love, but it's a whole thing. This was a pretty easy read. It was a good read. I would give this book probably like 3.5, maybe 4 stars. A nurse leaves her husband because he literally beat the shit out of her. So she moves from California over to Boston because she's literally on the run. Like, she doesn't know where the hell he is, what's going on. She changed her whole identity. Her name is now Sunny. She goes to Boston as a traveling nurse, gets a job there, plans to be there for 6 months. Meets a guy, of course, named Tyler, who he's a hitman, okay? So he's essentially a hitman, and his father has, like, this company. They're, like, they have a lot of money, okay? But he's the hitman for the company, and he's going to be taking over the company. And since he was born, and this other girl was born, like, their families were friends, and so they basically made it to where they're going to marry each other, so that way they can have a kid together. Like, it was kind of like an arranged marriage. It's before they were even born, okay? With their friends. So, anyways, he's pretty much like, he sees her at a coffee shop, Sunny, right? And he's like, kind of in love with her already. Who is she? So then he finds out about her life, obviously. She finds out a little bit about his, but doesn't know everything. Like, she kind of suspects that he's probably a hitman, but, like, doesn't know. And so, of course, they fucking fall in love, but she's like, absolutely the hell not. because I'm leaving in 6 months. Like, she's set on this. She's on the run from homeboy over there who's now trying to find her. She gets a phone call from an unknown number, and she's like, hello, and he's like, blah, 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 blah. Basically, let's work things out. She freaks out, and, like, she's like, hell no. So she wants to leave on the run. And Tyler over here is like, absolutely not in love with you, tells the other bitch to kick fucking rocks, doesn't care what's going to happen with the businesses. It's a whole thing, okay? It's a whole thing. So, Promises We Made, you guys need to read it. It's literally like 10 stars from me. It's so good. Another Valentine short read, Valentine's Sleigh, was wild. So this woman and her husband, he basically treated her like shit, didn't like her. She finds out that he had been poisoning her like this whole time and trying to off her. She goes into a coma, which they later find out that he like kept her in this coma. He was like big. He could get away with anything in their small town. So then they deem her dead. She gets buried. There's this guy that went to school with her, knew her. He, like, runs the graveyard, and he hears somebody screaming. He's like, what the fuck? Who's screaming? Finds out it's her because she got buried alive. So he undigs her, lets her, like, you know, come to his house because she don't want anybody to know because she don't know who the fuck she can trust. So now she wants to find out answers and get all the information. So they sneak into basically her house with her husband, but now, you know, she's dead. So, like, it's like her ex-husband, but he doesn't know it. So they sneak in there, he finds them, they end up killing him, and then it's like, dude, I was not ready for this. First of all, I was so stuck on the fact of being buried alive. But anyways, her and graveyard guy, they fall in love, so there's that. Out of the whole series, because they're all short reads, I would recommend this one out of all of them, to be honest with you. Death to Valentine's, this book was fucked up. So, this girl and this guy, they break up, okay? And her best friend's like, let's go to a Galentine's party. So she's like, God, fine. So she dresses basically because she's looking for somebody to hook up with because F it. So she goes and her ex is there. And they have to wear masks. So like, but she knows that her ex is there and he's there with his new girlfriend or whatever. And then she's like, what the fuck? And so she sees him making out. So she goes to this guy and starts kissing him. Turns out it's dude's brother. Now, she grew up with them, and they were always, like, close, but his brother always did everything for her. Like, he showed up for her when it mattered, whereas loser ex-boyfriend, he didn't give a shit but just, like, himself. And so, while they're at this party, there was, like, a blizzard, so they couldn't leave. All of a sudden, she finds this woman who was clearly murdered, and then, by the way, this is a short read. And so she finds her schmurdered, and she's like, what the fuck? And so she's like telling her best friend about it. Well, come to find out, plot twist, her best friend is the one who did it because she was sick and tired of her being the center of attention. And then so then she went to go off her best friend, and then homeboy there comes and saves the day. And then they live happily ever after at the end. Another Valentine short read, A Play for Love, is about these college students, and her best friend basically talked her into taking like an acting class, and so she thought she was gonna get like an easy grade. Well, it turns out they actually have to perform in it, and she's like, oh my God, like I don't want to do this. Long story short, this guy shows up and he was like talking to the teacher because he literally was pursuing acting. And so he'd asked the teacher like if he could, you know, do this role faster because he had shit to do basically because he was going to actually act, you know. So she gets paired up with him, of course, which is 40% of their grade. They end up having to kiss and they had to play Romeo and Juliet. So years go by, 4, 5, 6, 7 years goes by, and he's now down bad actor, okay? He was like a one-hit wonder. There was only a couple of shows. And so now he's doing like these dumb little skits with his friend, like his roommate, and they don't have rent money and all this other shit. Ends up seeing her, and of course, sparks fly, and it becomes a whole thing, and then, you know, they're in love. Typical Valentine's story. Second act is another Valentine's short read that's based around actors like for a Broadway show. And so their big Broadway show for Valentine's Day, what happened is like most of the actors, you know, the performers, they got food poisoning because they thought that they were going to have goddamn shrimp tacos. And so like, what the fuck? So they're trying to like get replacements because the replacements of the replacements, they all have food poisoning. So there was this guy that he had did the acting before, the Broadway shows before, but he was in the middle of like, he became kind of like a superstar, right? And so he was on a show and everybody knew him as Dr. So-and-so with the good body. And they ended up reaching out to him and he was like, hell yeah. And the main character, the girl, she was like, I've done this because they did like the Broadway show before. And so she's like, sees him. Of course, sparks start flying. Okay. And if you're wondering, yes, they nailed the show and people were so excited that Mr. Doctor over here with the good body showed up and then they lived happily ever after. The end. Time Will Tell is about this grandmother who had, well, it's two grandmothers, okay? And they were in love with each other, but in that time period, like it was kind of frowned upon, so it was a secret, and then they broke up, but then they made like a time capsule of their relationship. Well, after the grandmother had passed, the grandmother had a letter for her granddaughter. So her granddaughter's like, what the fuck? So she finds this time capsule, but she's like, damn, can't open it because the other grandmother, they have the key to this. So she puts out like an email type of thing, I don't know, you know, to find out who is basically related to the other grandmother. So this guy who's in another country, because I think she was in Canada and I think he was like London maybe, I think. I forgot. But I'm pretty sure he was like in London or something. Anyways, so then she makes a trip and brings the time capsule with them. They open it up to see all the goodies. Well, they end up falling in love, of course, because it's a Valentine story. So they end up falling in love. And that's pretty much it. Accidentally Yours is a Valentine read. It's a short read. So basically this woman, she did like marketing, like that was her thing, right? Loses her job and she's like, what the fuck? I basically hate men. So she goes to troll who she thinks is like her ex-employer and like all the employees there, but she ends up going into this other like Zoom call that's for another company, and the guy's like, what the fuck? So we really do suck. So he offers her a job position and she's like, what the hell? So they end up like talking about it, and she's like, well, this is what I charge. She's like, and also I want an office chair because hers is just broke. Her rent's behind. She ain't got a fucking pot to piss in, basically. Like, she's about to get evicted out of her apartment. And so he agrees to her terms. Well, then they end up texting even more. And then he's like, hey, you want to go on a date kind of thing? Well, come to find out, he lives in her apartment building. And It was a pretty good short read. So he lives in our apartment building. They figure out who each other are. And, of course, then they date, and you can guess the rest. No One Knew is a book about an FBI agent that had to make a decision to take the shot on an 18-year-old boy that was holding his cousin hostage, and he had already offed his mother. So the agent made the shot. And after that, his family disowned him, and also the town had disowned him too, because they didn't like, obviously, that he did that, but they didn't want to factor in the part that the kid was clearly a Killer. Anyway, so then later on, he was working a case trying to figure out about this group that they had heard about, when there was a body that was found in the woods, and so this woman was working on the case. Of course, they meet each other, blah, 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 because the case intertwines, because obviously they go hand in hand. So if you want to know, yes, they clearly moved in together at the end. But anyways, then they find out that the whole reason for this murder that was going on was to get revenge on the agent, but also because they were like kind of sick and fucking tired of like politics, and they didn't want to pay taxes and all this other bullshit. But at the end of it, you know what? Lived happily ever after, and they got the bad guys. I was bored. The book was predictable. I was bored. If you want to read it, though, you can, but I give it a snore-bore rating. Same time next year is a book about a hockey player that's trying to go pro, and he's from Canada, but his, like, green card or visa or something is about to expire. And so his teammate, his sister, like, she works like a bar. She has like a bar that she, you know, does for the hockey games or whatever, but she never goes to a hockey game because her father is basically a piece of shit. Well, anyways, her brother convinces her to marry this guy, just for a year, so that way there he could still stay in the United States so he can get scouted to go pro because he's like a really good player. And so she decides, okay, fine, I'll go through it. He offers her 50 grand and she's like, yeah, I'll take the 50 grand because she wants to be part owner of this like bar that she works at because she grew up there. Her mom worked there. So they get married and, you know, they have to convince everybody that they're happy and blah, blah, blah. Well, long story short, they end up falling in love for real. And they did get married, but they did fall in love for real. And then, you know, the rest is history. And he did become a pro hockey player. And she ended up going to a game because she would never go to a game. And then she did. The end. Mayday! 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 That's how this story starts off. Nathaniel and Izzy meet each other on a plane. And Izzy is terrified of flying. And so she's telling Nathaniel, who he just like signed up for the military. So she's telling him, she's like, the first 3 minutes of a plane ride are like where, you know, you can crash, and then the last 3 minutes. And he's like trying to tell her like everything's going to be all fine and dandy and whatever. They're in the exit row. Guess what? Plane crashes. Down they go. Don't worry though. They make it. I really, really, really wanted to love this book, but to me it was like a typical romance. Okay, so anyways, she ends up having to go to the hospital. She has to have surgery done. And she had like a really bad concussion, and he wanted to stay there for the surgery, but he couldn't because he had to deploy out or whatever over in Afghanistan. And her sister was over there, like years had passed, and her sister was over there doing like press, and so she wanted to get her sister out of there. It was getting really bad, and he just so happens to be her bodyguard. So anyways, long story short, of course they get together and they're gonna get married and all the things. This book, it was all right, but I would probably give it like 3 stars. This one, another one in 2026 I wasn't ready for. The Fix, I was not ready for this one, okay? Let me just set the scene. This is going to be a longer review because it's so fucked up. And if you don't want me to ruin this book for you, then you should probably click off of it. And I might have to do a part 2 on this one so the video is not too long. So let me set the scene for you. Cheerleader with a football star, whatever, perfect couple, all this shit. She goes to a party and she thinks that she's pregnant. So she leaves, after she leaves the party, she stops at the store, gets a pregnancy test, takes the pregnancy test, right? Goes home, guess what? Intruders in her home, okay? They're doing the whole duct tape thing, whatever. They've got her, her sister, and her mom, and they're waiting on her dad to get home, all right? So then when her dad gets home, they, of course, get him, tie him up, the whole thing. She's put in her bedroom. Her sister's in her bedroom. Her mom's in her bedroom, okay? Stick with me here. So then, obviously, like, the worst of the worst happens to them, okay? Without going into too much detail, the worst of the worst happens to them. The dad, they're basically made, you know, he's made to watch this shit because payback. And so the girl who thinks that she's pregnant, she's like, I know that we're going to... That's what's going to happen. So she goes to free herself. And it takes her a while, but she gets herself freed. But at this point, they had already offed her sister. And so they had offed her mom too. And so she had got into her mom's room because she knew that there was a pew-pew in there. And so she ends up one of the intruders that was in there, okay? So she gets rid of him. The other one takes off. Pew! He takes off. She doesn't know who the hell it was. Well, then she's, of course, taken to the hospital. Her and her dad, they live. But her mom and her sister, they do not live, okay? So they're in the hospital. Of course, she finds out that she's pregnant. The fucking boyfriend is like, no, it's not my kid. It's theirs. Blah, 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 blah. Doesn't want anything to do with it. And also, my mom said that basically we shouldn't be together because I have big plans and things to do. See ya. So he leaves, okay? So then... after he leaves, she ends up she gives birth to a boy, but she ends up giving him up for adoption so he can have a better life. All right, I'll end it on this one, but wait for the part 2 of this video because it's fucked up. Okay, this is part 2. If you haven't seen the first one, go to the first one, come back to this one. So part 2. Okay, so she gives her son up for adoption, right? So years down the road, she, well, when there was an investigation done, okay, so there was an investigation done. The other guy who didn't have much money, his mom was an alcoholic that she had seen at the party, but he didn't have many friends, okay? So he was kind of like, I guess, like the nerd or the outcast, right? So when she was being questioned, he was of interest. This other guy was. He was of interest, and she could have easily cleared his name because she did see the faces, right? Well, when she was asked in the hospital, she's like, yeah, it could be a possibility. So his whole life changed because of that one statement that she made. And she didn't even know what was happening, right? So he had worked really hard. They didn't have much money. He lived with his mom. They didn't have much money. So he lost his scholarship that he had been working towards. So he was working towards getting a scholarship to go to college. He was very smart and very good with numbers. So he went off later on. He was like working at a grocery store, but he had went into the military. So he went into the military, and then he had got a job like doing other things, like kind of like CIA kind of shit, because he was so smart with numbers and computers and shit like that. So, and then she had went on and she had opened up like a butterfly farm. And so she was kind of doing that like her own business. Her dad remarried. Well, anyways, out of the blue, she gets a phone call from an unknown number, and they basically say, do you want a do-over? And she was like, what? A do-over there? And they're like, yeah, a do-over. And so she didn't really know what that meant. So then she agrees to it. They send her a picture of her son, who's now 11 years old. Like, we fast forward to 11 years, okay? So then she gets a picture. He's in a room, doesn't know where the fuck he is. He's literally in a room by himself with just a mattress and like a bottle of water, all right? And then they're like, also, you need to log into this website, which is on the fucking black web, you know what I mean? And they were like, you need to log into this so she could watch a live feed of her son, right? And then they're like, okay, well, you have 4 days to find your son and save him. Otherwise, like, he's not going to go to good people. And this is all the information that I give you, basically. So she couldn't contact the police. She couldn't contact nobody. So she gets in contact with that guy, the smart guy. And he's like helping her figure all this shit out. And if you want to know the ending, I can make a part 3, but I don't know if I'm going to tell you the end on it just yet. But that was part 2. It's definitely 5 stars. You got to read it. Always You and Me was a little fucked up because there was these 2 guys. One of them, she like had known for a long time, but like they were just friends. Like they never dated. She ended up meeting this other guy. They were getting ready to get married, and homeboy that she's known forever, like basically wanted to confess like his love for her. He's always loved her, so on and so forth. And so she was like thinking about it, like, oh my God, what should I do? Because she did love him, but she also loved like her soon to be husband that she was going to be marrying in like 2 days. Well, anyways, her husband, she ended up marrying the guy, not the one that had came back, but she ended up marrying the guy. He ended up passing away from cancer. They never had kids. And he was like, I need you to promise me, like while he was on his deathbed, he's like, I need you to promise me that you'll go visit homeboy. And basically he apologized for shit that he had done. Well, she finds out later on that the reason that homeboy had left and like just didn't pursue and said it was a mistake was because husband over here told him that she was pregnant with his kid, which she wasn't. That was a lie. But anyways, so they end up like working all this shit out and like figuring out what, you know, what's going on. Don't worry. They ended up falling in love, but she ended up having the husband's kid anyway, because, you know, they had frozen embryos, sperm, whatever. And so she ended up having his kid, and then he raised the kid with her. And that was pretty much it. Venomous Attraction. Yoo-hoo! I give this one like a 1 star, maybe even a 2. This book is a playoff from Venomous Kiss. It's a series. The 3rd book isn't out yet. It gets released in February 2026. And if you read the first one, there's a therapist that is in that one, which talks about it in this one. So it's the therapist guy that meets Cora, and what, you know, it was, I felt like I was reading kind of the same book, but different characters. Does that make sense? So this one, I probably wouldn't recommend. I mean, if you want to read the series, go for it. But I was really, really bored in this one. I thought that there was going to be more hunting in it because in the first one, they were doing hunting. So I thought it was going to be a play off of that. But it was really like them falling in love. And I don't know. It was boring. It was boring for me. I wouldn't recommend this book at all.